My name is Harper Lowell, and I'm 36 years old. 2 years ago, two sisters walked into my house carrying everything they owned in one gray duffel bag, and the person who fought hardest to tear them apart was my own mother, at my own dinner table. She fell for the 6-year-old the day they met. The 14-year-old she called damaged. Then one Sunday, over pot roast, she set down her fork and said, "Keep the sweet one. Send the older girl back." 11 o'clock that night, I heard the front door unlock. My eldest stood there with her shoes tied and her bag packed, ready to vanish so her little sister could stay. I stopped her at the door. But what my mother did 3 weeks before our adoption hearing, and what a 14-year-old girl had been quietly saving on her phone for months, none of us saw coming. Not even the judge who walked in that morning carrying a stack of documents nobody expected. Welcome back, Dill, boundaries, and the moments everything changed. If stories about family, loyalty, and hard-won peace speak to you, drop a comment below, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this one ends. Before the girls, my life ran on hospital time. I've been a pediatric ICU nurse in Dayton, Ohio for 12 years, which means I'm the person who tells parents the truth at 3 in the morning and holds the cup while they shake. I'm good in a crisis. I'm terrible at asking for help. My marriage ended when I was 32, and I'll spare you the long version. I wanted to foster kids from the system, and my ex-husband wanted children who came, in his words, without mileage. He got a new wife. I got a lawyer, a license, and a little blue Craftsman house on Beckett Lane that I rewired, replumbed, and repainted with my own 2 hands. Here's the strange part I didn't notice for years. I never hung a single picture in that house. 4 years, bare walls, a box of frames in the basement. Some part of me kept living like a tenant in my own life, ready to be told my lease was up. It took 2 kids and one courtroom to show me why. The night that changed things was an ordinary shift. A 7-year-old came through the unit after a bad wreck, and for 6 days, not one adult came to sit with her. I held her hand between med passes and thought, no child should have to be easy to love before somebody shows up. I finished my foster certification that spring. The placement call came on a Tuesday in September, while I was scrubbing in. 2 girls, the coordinator said. Sisters. 14 months in the system, 2 placements already behind them. Then she lowered her voice like she was doing me a favor. "Fair warning," she said. "The little one's a doll. The older one doesn't trust anybody." They arrived on a Friday with one gray duffel bag between them. Nora was 13 then, tall for her age, spine straight as a fence post, and she came through my front door the way I walk into a code, scanning exits, counting adults, cataloging everything that could go wrong. Sadie was 5, all curls and gap teeth, and she held on to the cuff of her sister's sleeve like it was a handrail. Their file was 2 inches thick, but the story inside it was short and brutal. Their mother died of an overdose when Nora was 12. Their grandmother took them in, sold her car to buy bunk beds, and died of a stroke 10 months later. After that came a foster family who smiled through the home visits and then asked the agency, in writing, whether they could keep just Sadie. Nora was standing in the hallway when that phone call happened. She heard every word of it. So when people ask me why that girl trusted no one, I tell them she trusted the evidence. That first night I made spaghetti, showed them their room, and told them the drawers were theirs. Sadie was asleep by 8, one hand still knotted in her sister's sleeve. Nora said "Thank you, ma'am," exactly once, and lay down on top of the covers in her clothes. The next week, while vacuuming, I found the duffel bag under her bed. It was still packed. Folded shirts, a toothbrush in a sandwich bag, Sadie's spare shoes on top. Half her life zipped up and pointed at the door. I stood there holding the vacuum hose and made a decision that shaped everything after. I didn't say a word about that bag. Not yet. You learn a kid's history by watching what they do automatically. Nora ate fast with one arm curled around her plate. She washed her cup the second she finished, dried it, and put it back exactly where it came from, erasing all proof she'd eaten. She asked permission for things no child should have to ask for. An apple, a second blanket, the good shampoo. Her grades were straight A's, and it wasn't ambition. It was insurance. She parented Sadie so smoothly I almost missed it. Braids before school, vegetables negotiated, nightmares talked down in a whisper before they woke the house. That girl had been somebody's mother since she was 12. About a month in, I told her she didn't have to do the dishes every night, that she could just be a kid here, watch TV, leave a mess. She looked at me the way I look at a hopeful lab result, wanting it, not buying it. "It's okay," she said, and her voice was light as a grocery receipt. "I'm good at leaving." She said it the way other kids say they're good at math, like a skill she kept sharp, like it would be needed. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. In the ICU, we have a saying, kids don't get anxious about monitors unless the monitors have gone off before. Nora wasn't afraid I'd hate her, hate she could work with. She was afraid I'd keep her just long enough for it to hurt, and then let her go the way everyone else had. And the worst part is, the person who would test exactly that fear was already on her way over with a lemon cake. My mother, Carol Lowell, is 63, a retired second-grade teacher, and the reigning queen of her church's Women's Guild. She showed up that first Sunday with a lemon cake and opinions. My dad Tom came too, carrying the newspaper he uses as a shield, and my younger sister Rachel breezed in late, selling houses on her phone in my driveway. Mom took one look at Sadie, the curls, the missing tooth, the crayon drawing already taped to my fridge, and melted like butter in a skillet. "Oh, this one's an angel," she said, and scooped her up. And honestly, it was sweet. Then she turned to Nora, and the temperature changed. She didn't hug her. She interviewed her. "What school were you at before? Were you ever held back? Was there ever any trouble with the police?" Nora answered every question in a level, careful voice, hands folded, like a girl who had sat across from caseworkers her whole life and knew the drill. My dad turned a page. Rachel looked up from her phone long enough to say Sadie was so adoptable. Oh my gosh. Which is a compliment the way a price tag is a compliment. I redirected, refilled coffee, kept it pleasant, the job I have done in my family since I was 9 years old. At the door, Mom hugged me tight, and I remember feeling relieved, thinking, okay, first contact. We survived it. Then she put her mouth close to my ear, warm as anything, and whispered, "You know you don't have to take both." She patted my cheek and walked to the car, waving at Sadie through the window, and I stood on my own porch feeling like I'd swallowed something cold. In November, my caseworker Maria Vasquez sat at my kitchen table and laid the roadmap out in folders. The girl's birth parents' rights had already been terminated by the court before they ever reached me. That painful part was done. I was licensed, the placement was stable, and I could petition to adopt them both. Ohio does adoptions through probate court, and Maria walked me through it plain. 6 months minimum of supervised placement, home visits, reports from her, plus a guardian ad litem, a court-appointed advocate named Dana Okafor whose only job was representing what was best for Nora and Sadie. Then Maria tapped the folder and gave me the detail that would end up mattering more than all the rest. In Ohio, a child over 12 has to consent to her own adoption, out loud, in front of the judge. Nobody could speak that yes, for Nora. Not me, not Maria, not the state. With the court's backlog, figure the middle of next summer for finalization, Maria said. Maybe 8 months out. 10 months felt like both forever and nothing. Then Maria closed the folder and got quiet in a way I'd learned to pay attention to. She told me placements for teenagers were scarce as hen's teeth, that sibling pairs with a teen were nearly impossible to place together, and that if this placement broke down, for any reason, the odds said Nora and Sadie would be separated, likely for good. Sadie would be adopted inside a year. Nora would age out of the system in group care. So whatever's solid in this house, Maria said, standing up, pulling on her coat. Keep it solid. I said that wouldn't be a problem. At the time, I genuinely believed the biggest threat to my family was a court calendar. The first shot was fired at the rec center pool, and I didn't even recognize it as a shot. It was a Saturday in early April, one of those indoor pool mornings that smell like chlorine and wet concrete. Sadie, 6 by then, was paddling in the shallow end when a boy twice her size yanked her goggles off her face and held them over her head while she cried. Nora crossed that pool deck like weather. She grabbed the goggles back, put her body between the boy and her sister, and told him to keep his hands off her. The boy's mother came over hollering about aggressive teenagers. The lifeguard, who had seen the whole thing, took Nora's side, and that was that. Except my mother had been sitting in the viewing gallery with her tea, watching. By Wednesday, the story had gone through the family like dye through water, and in Mom's telling, it had a new shape. The older one grabbed a little boy. The older one has a temper. You should have seen her eyes. I called Mom and corrected the record, polite but clear. A boy took Sadie's goggles. Nora protected her sister. The lifeguard confirmed it. Mom listened the way you wait for a kettle. Well, she said, you weren't there, honey. I was. That night, Rachel texted me, and I could hear Mom's dialect in every line of it. Mom's really worried about Sadie's safety. Nobody's attacking you. We should talk. I sat on my bed reading that text with a coldness spreading through my chest, because I finally saw the design of it. Nora being wonderful didn't slow this down. Every fact would be melted and recast the same way. The story wasn't about what Nora did. It was about what my mother needed her to be. Then came the campaign I could see, which fooled me into thinking I was seeing all of it. Invitations started arriving with a hole in the middle. Grandma wants to take Sadie to the zoo Saturday. Just Sadie, so she gets some special time. A shopping trip for a flower girl dress for my cousin's wedding, sized 6. A tea party at the church for granddaughters, singular. Every offer was warm, generous, and built to teach one child she was chosen and the other that she was tolerated. I said no every single time, and I said it in the same words, so there could be no confusion about the policy. Both girls, or neither. Mom would laugh and call me dramatic. For heaven's sake, Harper, it's the zoo, not a custody fight. But I'd watched Nora's face during one of those phone calls, the way she went smooth and pleasant and completely blank, a door easing shut without a sound. And I knew exactly what was being installed in her, invitation by invitation. I set the rule out loud at Sunday dinner in front of everyone. The girls come as a set, treat them that way or don't call. Dad nodded behind his paper. Rachel said obviously, of course, nobody's saying otherwise. Mom smiled and passed the green beans and I drove home. My house, my girls in the back seat. Feeling like I'd fenced the yard at last. That was my mistake. And I own it. I thought the fight would come through me, because it always had. My mother had simply stopped going through me. She'd found a channel I wasn't watching, one that rode the school pickup line and lived inside a 14-year-old's phone. My sister Rachel asked me to coffee in the middle of April, which should have tipped me off, because Rachel doesn't do coffee. She does drive-through and voicemail. She sells real estate, and she's good at it. And I watched her use every trick of the trade on me across that little table. She opened soft. She loved the girls. She admired me. And then the pivot, smooth as a model home tour. Had I really thought about what was fair to Sadie? Sadie could have a completely normal family life, Harp. School, grandma's house, holidays, no baggage. But that hinges on... And here she stirred her latte instead of finishing. I finished for her. On Nora being gone. Rachel leaned in, earnest as a brochure. She'd read things online about kids like her, she said. Attachment issues. It always surfaces eventually, and it lands on the younger one. There are group programs that specialize in teens, she said. She'd looked some up. Nora would honestly be better off with professionals. I sat there and heard the truth underneath the vocabulary. My family had held a meeting about my daughter, and this was the minutes being read. I kept my voice. ICU flat. She's not a placement, Rachel. Come summer, she's my daughter, same as Sadie. Rachel sat back, disappointed in me, and dropped the line she'd been sent to test. Mom already talked to someone about how these adoption things get, reconsidered. I asked who someone was. She suddenly remembered a showing across the town, gathered her keys, kissed the air near my cheek, and left me sitting with a paid-for latte going cold and that word ringing in my ears. Reconsidered. The next move was quieter and smarter, because it didn't look like a move at all. It looked like my mother getting busy. For months, she had covered 2 school pickups a week when my ICU shifts ran 12 hours. Her offer? Made back when she thought this arrangement was a phase I'd get over. Suddenly there was a dentist appointment, then a guild luncheon, then a vague, "Honey, my knees." Within 3 weeks, the whole net I'd built my work schedule on was gone, and she never once said no. She just became unavailable, which is deniable, which was the point. I scrambled. I traded day shifts for nights, slept in slices, and hired Mrs. Petty, the retired postmaster next door, to be at the bus stop on the days I couldn't. And while I was busy staying afloat, the story went out through the family phone tree. Poor Harper, drowning, overwhelmed, you can see it in her face. 2 was always going to be too many. Do you see the shape of it? First you pull the net, then you point at the falling. I want to be fair to my own blindness here. I clocked all of it. I wrote dates and cancellations in the Notes app on my phone, the same way I chart a patient who's quietly trending wrong. What I could not do was fix it. Because you can't force a grandmother to show up, and you can't cut your mother off completely while a caseworker is still evaluating whether your support system is stable. She had me fenced in with my own paperwork. Then one evening, Mrs. Petty mentioned, real casual, that Carol still came by the school some days. Not for pickup, just to stand at the fence and talk with Nora. Nora changed that spring, and it happened in centimeters, the way a patient goes bad slow before they go bad fast. She'd finally been loosening, leaving a cereal bowl in the sink like a normal teenager, humming in the shower, auditioning for the school play. Then, week by week, the loosening reversed. She dropped out of the play with a shrug. Her clipped answers came back. And at night, I'd walk past her door and see her sitting on the edge of her bed lit blue by her phone, reading something with her shoulders up around her ears. The night I finally asked, she turned the phone face down on the quilt in one smooth practiced motion and said, "It's nothing. School stuff." I stood in that doorway with my hand on the frame and made the second decision I'd give anything to take back. I let it go. I told myself teenagers need privacy, that trust had to run both directions, that hovering was its own kind of message. All true. All beside the point. It's the mistake I still meet at 2 in the morning. If you've ever watched someone you love go to work on a child's mind in ways too polite to name, if you've ever had to protect your kid from your own family, I want you to tell me about it in the comments, because I read them, and for a long time I thought I was the only one. And stick with me, because what was on that phone, and what my mother did with it 3 weeks before the hearing, is the reason this story ends in a courtroom. That summer, I still believed silence meant things were settling down. In this family, silence just meant the work had moved indoors. Nora turned 14 at the end of April, and I threw her a party, her first real one, she admitted, since 4th grade. I invited the family on purpose. Call it hope, call it evidence gathering. With my mother, those had become the same activity. Mom arrived beaming, carrying 2 wrapped boxes. For Sadie, whose birthday is in December, mind you, a stuffed horse the size of a golden retriever. Just a little something so she doesn't feel left out. For the birthday girl, a smaller box, beautifully wrapped, and inside it a compact rolling suitcase. Lavender, hard shell, name brand. Every young lady needs good luggage, Mom said, bright as a game show host. The room did that thing where the air goes thin. Nora looked at that suitcase for one long second, and then she performed the most fluent politeness I have ever seen from a child. Thanked her, admired the wheels, set it aside gently, like it wasn't a message with a handle on it. That composure broke something in me that shouting never could have. At cake time, Mom raised her lemonade and gave a toast that managed to be entirely about Sadie, our sunshine, our angel, growing up so fast, while the girl the candles were for sat there with her party hat straight and her face smooth. My dad cleared his throat, and for once in 40 years of marriage he said a sentence out loud. "Carol, go easy." Remember June? My mother's face slammed shut like a screen door in a storm. She changed the subject inside of 3 seconds, but I stood there holding a cake knife, thinking, who is June? In my whole life, I had never once heard that name. I got the story out of my father 2 days later in his garage, over an alternator neither of us was really fixing. June was my mother's older sister. I'll let that land the way it landed on me. My mother has a sister, and I grew up believing she was an only child. June was, in the language of that time and that family, the difficult one. Loud where Carol was tidy, in trouble at school, at church, at the dinner table. And in 1975, when June was 15 and Carol was 12, their parents put June on a bus to a great-aunt's farm in Missouri and told the neighbors she was helping with the harvest. She never moved back. Christmas cards for a few years, then nothing. Nobody ever said the word sent away, my dad told me, wiping his hands slow. They just stopped setting her place at the table. Your mother watched that whole thing happen when she was still a kid herself, Harper. She learned the family math early. There's room for the easy ones. He looked at me over his glasses. I'm not excusing her. I'm telling you where the recipe's from. I drove home gripping the wheel, doing something I resented having to do, aching for my mother. 12 years old, watching her parents make a daughter disappear and call it a harvest. Of course she believed love was a lifeboat with limited seats. She'd watched somebody get thrown out of it, and she'd learned to row. But here's where I landed, sitting in my driveway watching my girl's bedroom light glow. Understanding where a wound came from doesn't give it the right to bite the next child in line. It just tells you how deep the teeth go. In June, I did something small that turned out to be the hinge of this whole story. I bought Nora a dresser. Real wood, cherry, 6 deep drawers, the kind of furniture you buy for someone you expect to stay. I didn't ask first, because asking would have given her room to say, "Don't bother." We spent a Saturday repainting her room the green she'd once mentioned liking. One time, in passing, 3 months earlier. I'd written it down. And we hauled that dresser up the stairs ourselves, sweating and laughing when it wedged sideways on the landing. Sadie supervised from the top step, eating popsicles for the both of us. And then, that evening, with the room smelling like fresh paint, it happened. No announcement. Nora reached under her bed and dragged out the gray duffel bag. Packed since September. Packed through 3 foster homes. Packed like a parachute. And she unzipped it all the way for the first time in my house. Folded shirts into the second drawer. Toothbrush to the bathroom cup. Sadie's spare shoes to Sadie's closet, where they should have lived all along. Then she flattened that duffel with both hands, folded it into a square, and set it up on top of the dresser, high and empty, like a flag coming down at the end of a long war. Neither of us made a speech about it. I said the drawers stick a little in humidity. She said, "Okay." But I walked downstairs and cried into a dish towel where she couldn't see me, because I knew what I'd just watched. That was the first day my daughter lived here. The bag stayed empty for exactly 11 days. 11 days later, my mother invited herself to Sunday dinner at my house, and she brought reinforcements, Rachel, and my father, and a store-bought peach pie, which I should have read as a flag, because my mother bakes when she's happy and buys when she's on a mission. We got through the pot roast on small talk. The girls cleared their plates. Sadie was camped in the living room with cartoons turned up, and Nora had gone upstairs, or so I thought. And then my mother folded her napkin, aligned her fork with the table edge like she was squaring off paperwork, and said she wanted to talk to me before this adoption business went any further, while there was still time to think it through like adults. I said it had been thought through for 11 months. She smiled the smile she saves for slow learners. "Harper, honey. Nobody is saying anything against anybody. But you are a single woman with a demanding job, and there is a difference between rescuing a child and sinking your whole life, and everyone at this table can see which one Sadie is and which one." She paused there, delicately, the way you step around something on a sidewalk. "Which one the other one is. That girl came broken, sweetheart. You didn't break her, but you can't fix her either, and she will take Sadie down with her." I told her, evenly, that this was the last time this conversation would ever happen in my house. She looked at me for a moment. Then she set down her fork and said, in the exact voice she once used to announce that dinner was ready, "Keep the sweet one. Send the older girl back." The refrigerator hummed. Cartoons laughed in the other room at something none of us could see. And above us, on the staircase, one wooden step creaked. The third one from the top, the one I'd been meaning to fix all year. Nora had been standing there long enough to hear all of it. I didn't raise my voice. I've delivered too much bad news in small rooms to believe volume adds anything to the truth. I looked at my mother and I used the tone I use at 3 a.m. with frightened families. Level, slow, no exits. Those girls are a package deal, and in a few months, both of them will be my daughters. Anyone who can't hold both of them in the same heart at the same time doesn't need to be at the hearing, or at Christmas, or at this table. My mother's chin came up. "I am doing this because I love you," she said, and her voice shook. And here's the terrible thing. I believe she meant it. "You'll thank me when that girl finally shows her true colors." They always do. I looked at Rachel. My whole childhood, we were a team of two in that house, and I watched her choose, in real time, the way people always choose in my family. Quietly, by looking at her plate and saying nothing at all. Dad walked to the window and studied a backyard he'd seen 100 times. Mom gathered her purse, kissed Sadie's head on the way through the living room, and let the storm door click shut behind her, gentle as a period at the end of a sentence. Rachel followed. Dad squeezed my shoulder on his way out, which in his language is a eulogy. I cleaned the kitchen alone, and then went up to check on the girls. Sadie was asleep sideways with her whole body, the way only safe children sleep. Nora's door was closed. No light under it, no music, no shower running. A silence with its shoulders up. I told myself she was asleep. I have never been so wrong about a silence in my life. The front door has a deadbolt that thunks like a knuckle on wood, and at 11 o'clock that night it woke me out of a half-sleep like a monitor alarm. I came down the stairs and there she was in the yellow porch light through the sidelight glass, coat zipped, sneakers double knotted, the gray duffel packed full again and riding her shoulder like it had never left. On the entry table was a note with my name on it. I read it standing 3 feet from her, and I can still recite it. "Take care of Sadie. Don't look for me, I'm fine. If I'm gone, they'll let you keep her. Tell her I went somewhere good." That was the plan my 14-year-old had built out of the overheard arithmetic at my dinner table. She would delete herself, so the family would sign off on her sister. She had a bus schedule in her coat pocket. She'd left her house key on top of the note, because she is polite in ways that break your heart. I did not yell, and I did not grab her, because you don't snatch at a kid whose whole life taught her that adult hands take things away. I sat down on the bottom stair, in my robe, and asked her to sit with me for 1 minute before she went. She sat, bag still on her shoulder, ready. I told her I'd heard my mother tonight. Every word. And so had she. So let's stop pretending either of us hadn't. Then I said the thing I'd been carrying since the day I found that packed bag under her bed. Nobody in this house earns their bed. Not you, not Sadie, not me. It's yours because you're mine. That's the whole test. She stared at the floor for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and furious and 12 years old. What if the judge believes her? And God help me, I didn't have an answer yet. I just knew that question had a return address, and it wasn't Nora's idea alone. Nora slept that night with her door open and the duffel on the floor beside her bed, still packed. I didn't push. A parachute takes time to trust falling without. I went downstairs, and at 11:40 on a Sunday night, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, wide awake, waiting for the apology. I could hear it in her hello. What she got instead was the shortest speech I have ever given. "Tonight your granddaughter packed a bag to run away, so the family would let me keep her sister. That is what your love built. You will not see either girl or me until you can respect both of them. Not one. Both." She started in about how nobody told that child to do anything, and I hung up while she was mid-sentence, which, as far as I know, no one had ever done to Carol Lowell. Monday morning, I did the thing that scared me more than the phone call. I called Maria, my caseworker, and told her everything: the campaign, the dinner, the bag by the door. Understand what that meant. I was voluntarily writing family conflict into my own case file, months before a judge would read it, with no way to erase it. The version of me from a year earlier would have smoothed it over, managed it, protected the picture. But secrets were my mother's home field. Sunlight was the only ground I could win on, so I put my own file on the table, and Maria listened, took notes, and said quietly that this happened more often than anyone would believe. Rachel texted that week, "You're tearing this family apart over a stranger's kid." I read it twice and didn't answer. 2 weeks later, Maria called me, and her voice had changed. "Harper, something's been filed. We need to talk. There is a species of weapon available to respectable people that leaves no fingerprints, and it is called a concern. Somebody, signed only a concerned family member, had sent the agency a letter about my home. It said the older foster child had a documented history of physical aggression towards smaller children, citing an incident at a community pool. It said the household was visibly overwhelmed. It closed by asking, more in sorrow than in anger, whether the placement of the older girl should be reconsidered. For the safety of the little one. That word again. Reconsidered. Maria sat at my kitchen table and gave it to me straight. She didn't believe a syllable of it. It didn't matter what she believed. A safety allegation against a child in care triggers a mandatory assessment, interviews, home visits, the works. And until it closed, our finalization hearing, then 3 weeks out, was on hold. My court date, the one I'd promised 2 girls like it was a sunrise, dissolved into the phrase pending review. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Could anything speed it up? Procedure is procedure, Maria said, and the cruelest part is that procedure is right to exist. It protects kids like Sadie every single day. It just also hands a loaded form to anyone with a grievance and good stationery. After she left, I read the copy of that letter until the ink should have worn off. Anonymous, was it? The pool story bent exactly the way it had been bent at my mother's table. And there, in the very first line, sitting in plain sight like a signature, the writer's tender worry for the child she called the sweet one. If you have never had your family inspected on suspicion of being a danger to itself, I hope you never learn what it does to the air in a house. The assessment team came twice, once scheduled and once not. They were kind, professional, and thorough, and I want to be clear that I don't resent a single one of them. They were doing exactly what I'd want done if the letter had been true. But I stood in my own hallway watching a specialist interview my 6-year-old with dolls and soft questions. Does anyone at home ever scare you? Does your sister ever hurt you? And Sadie, bless her literal heart, said the scariest thing in the house was the basement furnace. And could she have the doll with the yellow hair? Nora's interview was worse, because of how good she was at it. She sat straight, answered in complete sentences, anticipated follow-ups. Watching through the kitchen doorway, I realized I was seeing a skill set, honed across years of being the file everyone read before they met her. She was performing safety for strangers. Again, because an adult who claimed to love this family had decided she was a problem to be documented. Every competence I own went useless in those weeks. I can run a code, I can talk a father through the worst hour of his life, and I could do absolutely nothing here but answer questions and keep my kitchen clean. The night after the second visit, Nora didn't come down for dinner. She said she wasn't hungry, through the door. I stood on the landing with my hand on the rail and physically could not make myself walk to her room and look at the top of that dresser. I looked the next morning while she was at school. You already know what I found. The gray duffel was down off the dresser, under the bed again, half-packed, shirts folded with that terrible neatness, the sandwich bag toothbrush back at her old post. The zipper sat open at half-mast, like even the bag couldn't decide. I sat down on the edge of her bed and held my own elbows, and I understood the true cost of that anonymous letter. It hadn't slowed down any paperwork. Not really. It had reached into my house and rearmed a child's oldest reflex. They are deciding about you again. So stand near the exit. That evening, I didn't lecture and I didn't tidy the evidence away. When she got home, I told her I'd seen the bag and that she could keep it packed for as long as her body needed the exit row. It was still her room, her dresser, her drawers, and none of that expired. She studied me for a moment with those triage eyes. She didn't say anything, but she left her door open a crack that night, and I'll take a cracked door over a speech any day of the week. It was 2 in the morning when I got up for water and saw the phone glow leaking through that crack. Steady, patient. Nora was awake, wrapped in her quilt, scrolling slowly through something, reading, stopping, reading again, like a person checking a wound. A caseworker once told me that paperwork has no memory for love, it only remembers what's written down. If someone has ever aimed the word concern at your family like a weapon, tell me in the comments, and stay close, because what that child had been keeping on her phone was about to reach a judge's hands. 3 days after the second home visit, Nora came downstairs while I was paying bills, set her phone on the kitchen table between us, and slid it across like a surrender. "You should see it before they decide," she said. What was on that phone went back 7 months. Screenshots, dated, organized in an album titled Homework, texts from my mother, and a thinner file from Rachel, sent directly to a 13, then 14-year-old girl. "If you really love your sister, you'll be gone before the hearing. You'll always be the reason Sadie doesn't get a real family. Girls like you end up alone anyway, sweetheart. Better it happens before she's old enough to remember you." There were logistics. God help us. A schedule for the county bus. The name of a youth shelter 2 towns over, with a gentle note that nobody would blame her. And threaded through all of it, the drumbeat, patient as water on stone. Leave before the adoption. Leave so it doesn't get ugly. Leave because you love her. I read every one with my hands flat on the table so they'd stay still. Then I asked the only question left. Why save them and never tell me? Nora looked at the table. Because when kids say things about adults, the kid gets moved. She recited it like a law of physics, because in her life, it had been. I wasn't keeping them to show anyone. I kept them so when everybody said I was lying, I wouldn't be. Then she scrolled to the end, to a message dated 4 days ago, 4 days after the anonymous letter froze my hearing, and turned the screen so I could see my mother's last text. "It's not too late to do the right thing, sweetheart." I want to be honest about the hour that followed, because it was the hinge my whole life turned on. My first instinct, worn smooth by a lifetime of daughterhood, was to manage it, call mom, confront her privately, contain the damage, protect what was left of the family picture. "Give her a chance to explain," said the good daughter in me, in a voice I'd been obeying since before I could ride a bike. And then I looked at the girl across the table, who had carried this arsenal for 7 months without firing it, purely so she wouldn't be called a liar someday, and I understood that every private phone call I'd ever made to smooth my mother's messes had been a payment on a debt that never shrank. Managing it quietly was her game, played on her field, and I had never once won there. So I didn't call my mother. I asked my daughter, "It's your phone, your story. Do you want the judge to see it?" Nora looked toward the living room, where Sadie was narrating a puzzle to herself in 2 voices. When she turned back, her face was older than mine. "She reads it," she said, "or they never stop." The next morning, I called Dana Okafor, the girl's guardian ad litem, and Maria, and by Friday, Nora, with me beside her, walked them through every screenshot, in order, at my kitchen table. Everything through the proper channel, onto the record, in the light. No family meeting, no ambush phone call, no smoothing the road. For the first time in my life, I let the truth about my mother travel without me running ahead of it with a broom. The machine my mother had switched on ground forward, but now it was chewing on a full set of facts. The assessment closed in the middle of August, allegation unfounded. The report, Maria read me the highlights, noted that the pool incident was verified by a lifeguard as protective, not aggressive, and that the 6-year-old described her sister, quote, as the safest person in the world. Dana filed her guardian ad litem report with the court, and the screenshots went with it, dated and documented, alongside the anonymous letter with its familiar vocabulary. Our hearing was reset for the first week of September, almost exactly a year after 2 girls and 1 duffel bag came through my door. I slept that night like I hadn't since spring. And then my mother did the thing I still have trouble explaining to people who didn't grow up inside her weather system. She found out what had reached the court. Rachel confirmed the family grapevine had it by August, and she did not retreat. She announced, through Rachel, that she and Dad would be attending the hearing. Sadie deserves to have her grandmother there, the message said. I have nothing to hide. Judges know what family means. That's the thing about a fortress. From inside, surrender and vindication look identical. She was certain, genuinely, serenely certain, that a judge would look at her, a church-going grandmother of 63, look at Nora, a foster teen with a file, and see the world the way she saw it. Maria just told me to breathe and trust the process. One thing about Judge Pruitt, she added, she reads everything, every page, and she does not care for people who use children as chess pieces. The night before the hearing, I ironed 2 dresses and explained to Nora, one more time, the part of Ohio law that put a 14-year-old at the center of the room. Because she was over 12, no adoption could happen unless she consented. Herself, out loud, to the judge. Nobody could say that yes for her. She sat on the edge of my bed in her pajamas, picking at the quilt. I've said yes to every placement since I was 12, she said. You nod. You say yes, ma'am. You don't make trouble. They keep you longer. She looked up. How am I supposed to make this one sound different? It is different. I sat down next to her and told her the truest thing I knew. You've spent your whole life saying yes so people would keep you. Tomorrow is the first yes that keeps you. Nobody in this house earns their bed. Tomorrow a judge writes that down where it can never be erased. She leaned into my shoulder, and we sat there a while, not fixing anything, which I've learned is its own kind of medicine. Down the hall, Sadie had laid out her dress on the floor in the shape of a person, shoes and all, ready to jump into at dawn. Nora got up to go to bed and stopped in my doorway with her hand on the frame and said, If the judge asks why you want me to, what are you going to say? I told her I'd been rehearsing that answer for a year. The next morning, Judge Margaret Pruitt walked into that courtroom carrying a stack of documents. And the first thing she read out loud was not our adoption petition. Probate court in our county is a small room that smells like paper and floor polish, oak benches, a seal on the wall, a flag that has seen 1,000 family beginnings and endings. Finalization day is supposed to be the happy assignment. The clerk keeps a camera at her desk for the pictures families take by the bench afterward. Maria sat with us at the front table, Dana beside her. Sadie perched on my left in her yellow dress, swinging her feet, and Nora sat on my right, straight-backed, hands folded, doing the thing where she reads a room like a monitor. And behind us, in the second row of the gallery, sat my family. My mother had dressed for church, pearls, the good coat. And she wore the calm, pre-forgiven expression of a woman who expects the institution to side with her, because institutions always had. She actually waved at Sadie, fingers fluttering, and Sadie, 6 years old and mercifully unbriefed, waved back. Rachel studied the agenda like it was a listing sheet. My father sat between them with his hat in his hands, looking at the flag. I had told Maria they might come. She'd told me the hearing wasn't closed, and family often attends finalizations. Nothing about them being there was against any rule. It only felt like an ambush because I knew what they were waiting for. Nora's hand found mine under the table, cold as a river stone. Then the door beside the bench opened and Judge Margaret Pruitt came in. And she was not carrying one slim petition folder. She was carrying a stack of documents thick as a phone book, and she set it down on the bench slowly, squarely, the way you set down something you intend to use. We all rose, we all sat, and Judge Pruitt put on her glasses and looked at the room over the top of them for a moment before she spoke. Before this court proceeds with the petitions, she said, there are materials in this file that require daylight because they concern the welfare of the children before me. She opened the stack, and the first thing she read out loud in that courtroom was not our adoption petition. It was the first line of an anonymous letter. I write out of love for my granddaughter, the sweet one. She let the words sit in the air. Behind me, I heard my mother's breath change, one sharp intake through the nose, because there are sentences you can disown right up until a judge reads them back to you in your own vocabulary. Pruitt kept going, even-voiced, a page at a time. The allegation, the assessment, unfounded, verified, closed. The Guardian ad litem's report. And then, without theater, she read 2 of the text messages into the record. Just 2, in the flat cadence of a woman reading a prescription label. If you really love your sister, you'll be gone before the hearing. It's not too late to do the right thing, sweetheart. I watched the smiles in the second row die in order. Rachel's first, then my mother's. That serene certainty draining out of her face like water out of a sink, because the institution was not siding with her. My mother rose halfway to her feet. Your Honor, I wrote out of love. Judge Pruitt did not raise her voice. She lowered it. Ma'am, in this room, love is spelled out in conduct. Please sit down. Then she turned to me. Ms. Lowell, I have questions. Under oath, please. I swore the oath with my hand steady and my knees somewhere else entirely. Judge Pruitt took off her glasses. These communications came from your mother and your sister, she said. This court is being asked to make these children permanently yours. So I need to hear your plan, Ms. Lowell. Not your hopes. Your plan. When this family asks you to choose again, at Thanksgiving, at a graduation, in a hospital waiting room, what happens? And there it was. The question I had been dodging in one form or another my entire adult life, now wearing a robe and waiting on my answer under oath. I understood exactly what was being offered. I could soften it. Family tensions, working through it, counseling. The vocabulary was right there, worn smooth from years of my own use, and it would preserve some threadbare version of me and my mother. Or I could tell the truth into a court record that would outlive us both. I looked at my mother, the woman who taught me to read, who cut my apples into rabbits, who learned at 12 years old that a family is a lifeboat you can be thrown out of. And I chose. My house is not a tryout, I told the judge, and I kept my ICU voice, level and slow. Nobody in it earns their bed. Anyone who treats one of my daughters as returnable has no seat at my table, whoever they are, including the woman who raised me. There is no version of this where I choose again, Your Honor, because the choosing is finished. It finished at my front door, at 11 at night, when a child tried to erase herself to pay a bill that was never hers. The room was very quiet. My mother was crying. Real tears, ugly ones, the first I'd seen from her since her own mother's funeral, and I let them fall without running to catch them, which was its own goodbye. Judge Pruitt nodded once and turned to the smallest chair at our table. Nora, the law says this next part belongs to you. Nora, Judge Pruitt said, and her voice changed for it, lost its bench and found its kitchen table. You are 14. In Ohio, that means this adoption cannot happen unless you want it. Not unless your sister wants it, or Ms. Lowell wants it, or I think it's wise. Unless you do. Do you understand that you're allowed to say no? Nora stood up. Nobody had asked her to stand. She did it anyway, the way you stand for things that matter. She looked at the gallery first, at my mother. One long, level second, the look of a girl who had read every message and saved them all. Then she looked at me. I've been packed since I was 12, she said, and her voice shook on the first word and steadied with everyone after it. First night in every house I keep the bag ready, because it always ends, and I like knowing where the door is. I used to be good at leaving. It was the one thing I was best at. She took a breath. I'd like to be done with that now. Yes. Please. Judge Pruitt held the silence like something warm in both hands. And then Sadie. 6 years old. Yellow dress. Feet nowhere near the floor. Could not contain the proceedings 1 second longer and announced to the entire courtroom, "Me too, both of us. We're staying at Harper's forever." The clerk laughed. Maria laughed and wiped her eyes in one motion. Even the flag looked better. The only sound from the second row was my father clearing his throat twice, the way he does when his eyes need an alibi. Judge Pruitt slid the first decree in front of her, uncapped her pen, and said, "Then let's make it official." 2 signatures. That's the whole mechanism, in the end. After a year, 1 anonymous letter, 1 frozen court date, and 7 months of poison delivered to a child's phone, the actual moment took less time than pouring coffee. Judge Pruitt signed Sadie's decree, then Nora's, and said the words I intend to have read at my funeral. From today, as far as the record of this court is concerned, you are what you have already been for a year. A family. She granted the name changes. Both girls chose Lowell, and Nora asked the clerk shyly whether the L would be printed on a real birth certificate. And Pruitt allowed, dryly, that this was the best appointment on her docket, and the camera was already warmed up. We took the traditional picture beside the bench, Sadie holding the gavel with both hands like a trophy fish, Judge Pruitt almost smiling. It was, without competition, the happiest room I have ever stood in. And then we walked out into the hallway, and my mother was waiting by the elevator. She looked smaller than the courtroom had made her. She looked at the balloons Maria had smuggled in, at Sadie's dress, at everything except Nora, and she said, "You'll regret choosing them over your family, Harper. Maybe you already know that there are sentences that arrive like verdicts and leave like confessions." I felt the old reflex twitch, smooth it, soften it, fix her face for her, and I let the reflex die where it stood. "They are my family, Mom," I said. ICU level, final. "You were invited. You chose the door." She walked to the elevator. My father hung back one moment, put his hand on Nora's shoulder, the first time he'd ever touched her, and said, "Welcome aboard, kiddo," and then followed his wife, because 40 years is its own current. In the car, Nora watched the courthouse shrink in the mirror. Then she said, "So what do we do with the bag?" Here's what the following weeks actually looked like. Because endings in real life are made of small paper things, the amended birth certificates came in a government envelope, and Nora read hers at the kitchen table twice through, silently, like a letter from someone she'd been waiting years to hear from. Nora Lowell. She traced the print with her thumb to see if it was real ink. Then she went upstairs and came down with the framed courtroom photo, took the hammer out of the junk drawer like it was the most natural thing in the world, and drove a nail into my living room wall, the first nail that wall had felt in 4 years of me living like a tenant in my own house. We hung the picture together, crooked, then fixed it. By Christmas, that wall had 6 frames on it, and I had stopped being able to explain why it was ever bare. Rachel texted in October. I didn't know how far Mom took it. I should have. That's not an apology, quite. It's a down payment, and I answered it like one. A short reply. The door left unlocked but the porch light off. We've had coffee once. We'll see. My mother sent a birthday card in December, addressed to Sadie alone, glitter and a $20 bill and love always, Grandma. I mailed it back the same week. No note, because the note had already been said under oath, and I don't repeat myself to people who heard me the first time. She still tells her guild she lost her daughter.